Hello and welcome to part 2 of my ongoing screencast series talking about Content Manager with Elasticsearch. In the previous video I showed how to aggregate upon owner location by changing the mapping definition for the record type within the Elasticsearch index. And that's where I'm starting with in this lesson. Is I've got the standard out-of-the-box naming convention for this particular index, and inside of it I have a record mapping that exposes owner location as a keyword. But that's it. I do not have any other fields or data that's stored inside of this. So what I need to do now is to move on to this particular lesson, which is how do I get retention dates, particularly the destruction date. I want that to be inside of my Elasticsearch index. The only way that I can do that out of the box without too much coding or just through doing it naturally would be to add a custom property. If I go into Content Manager and I add an additional field, then that field will be added into the Elasticsearch index. So I'm going to do that, but I'm not going to do it manually. I'm going to do it via code because that's just how I do things. So I'm going to open up PowerShell and I'm going to use some of the snippets that I have first to connect into the data set. And if I run this, you can see the very first thing I'm doing is I'm connecting into dataset ID as 45 as Brian McBinary. And so that's the very start of my script. The second part of my script is I want to go ahead and I want to create a new field. And this field I'm going to name destroy date. And I'm going to make it of a type date. If I run this, I can see that the field was created called destroy date. If I flip back over to Content Manager and hit refresh, there's my destroy date. However, what is not done with this is adding that field to every record type. If I go to a record type, I can see that the field is not checked. So what I do is go back to my snippet, and my snippet did have an optional bit of code here that I can use to enable this particular field on a given record type, but I want to do it on all the types. So I'm going to go ahead and add yet another snippet, and this time I'm going to do a for each after finding a set of objects. And in this case, my objects are going to be all record types, and so I just got to fix up the code here slightly, and there we go. Now I've iterated all of the record types in this set of code. I'm going to cut and paste my optional bit of code from the original snippet, and I'm going to paste that in here and then remove the hash symbols. That way I can uncomment it. And now this should work. It will now add this into every single record type, and there we go, added to each one. If I go back and I refresh or just open up any one of these, I can see it's now checked on there. Last thing I want to do inside of my PowerShell scroll and inside of my PowerShell script is I want to go ahead and iterate all of the records that are inside of it, and I want to put that value, that destruction date value, into this new custom field. So again, I'm going to use my snippets, and I'm going to be doing, this time I want a progress bar because there's going to be a bunch of records. So I'm going to call this updating records. I am again going to be searching for records. This time I'm going to be searching for just those that I'm actually indexing. And in this case, I'm going to copy that search string, put it there. Now, what I want to do is I want to set the value for each record. So I'm going to access the record. I'm going to set the user set field value. I'm going to pass in my field, and then the value of this is going to be a new value, which is a new object. Of type hptrim.sdk.user field value, and I'm going to pass in to the constructor the value that I want to store, which is actually the record.destruction date. Okay, then I just save the record, and I can write out a quick debug statement so that I can see that something happened, right? And what I'm going to do here is just do record.destruction date and record.number. Okay, if I don't need to save this, I just run this. You can see every single record is being updated, and boom, it's done. Some of these errored out. These are going to be ones that have issues with the records themselves. For instance, this one, the date published is wrong. That's not my problem. That's just the problem with the record. So I'm going to ignore those for now. And if I go back into the client and I actually modify my view panes for that search result set, I can see that I now have an additional field that's available called date. Where is it? Destroy date. Is that what I called it? Let's see here. Hit refresh. Try this again. There it is. There's my destroy date. So if I move the destroy date down and take a look at the value, you can see that it did copy over all the values from one field to another. If I flip on over and I take a look at the actual index here and just refresh it, I can see that the index metadata should now contain Oh, it's not containing it because I do not have content indexing enabled as an event. That's okay. I'm going to just do this manually real quick so I don't have to deal with the event processor. Just let that run. Once it's done, what we'll see is inside of this index here, the mapping for the records has the same problem, that it's not going to be usable. Here it is, destroy date. Notice what we've got. In this case, it's a little bit different. This has indexed it as a keyword. Why? Because when the data is submitted via the Content Manager indexing engine, it's sending it over as a string value. It is up to the record mapping to define what the type is, and in this case, it's just using, it's assuming it's a string. So I need to fix this, and to fix this, I actually have to do the same thing I did before, which is, first of all, I need to delete it. Second, I need to go back into my instance of Postman, and I need to update this such that I now have, in addition to the owner location, I also want a date. And I'm just going to steal the format of this from one of my other indexes. You can, you don't have to use, you just need the structure of it. And so I'm going to grab, where's my date? Come on. Date created. So I'm going to grab date created, go back into Postman, add that in. And then what I'm going to do here is, this is not date created, but destroy date. If I send this and post that, it recreates my index again like I expected it to, right? So here is my new 45 one. This one now has inside of the index metadata. For the mappings on my record, I now have a destroyed date that is a true date column and an owner location. If I reindex these again, this time what's going to happen is for the mapper for that index on the destroy date field will treat it like a date. In the index itself, it actually functionally does nothing, or very little at least, because if I go and I look at this, remember previously I didn't have a date, then it turned into a date that was a string, and now here it's the same thing. It's destroy date is still a string. That's how it gets submitted to content or to the Elasticsearch. That's how it's going to be treated by Elasticsearch. But the huge difference, why this is important and why that's so helpful to be able to do that, is within Kibana. If I go to Kibana and I create a brand new indexing pattern, I'm just going to remove these ones that I was playing with earlier. So here's my HP45, get rid of that one. I'm going to recreate this HP45 one, which is the one for the out-of-the-box demo data set. If I pick that, now I have a new time filter, the destroy date. If I create that, the cool stuff I can do with this is it's amazing. I'm going to go ahead and make that my default, but I'm going to go to discover. That's fine. Okay, here this is now has a time filter enabled. This wasn't available to me in my last video session because I hadn't had any date fields that I was using. But if I go ahead and now I give myself a date range of, let's say, from 2006, when this data set started, to, I'll go to today, but that's okay. It's really much later than that. Notice what it's now intelligently doing is it's giving me the ability to chart these points over a time range. And notice here, these are all my destruction dates. If I combine this with true date registered, date created, and other metadata fields, then I can really create some awesome dashboards. And that's what I'm going to do, not in the immediate next screencast, but probably the one after that. In the next screencast, we're going to focus on how to implement this without you actually having to do any code or any manual tasks, just getting this index or any index to routinely have data in the format that you want so that you can generate these reports on the fly without having to even go and do a manual reindex. That's all for today. Thanks for joining in.